Going to a new computer art tutorial, and what we're going to go over today is take another portrait image of some kind of athlete or some kind of figure in motion, preferably. Could be somebody just in a kind of emotional kind of stance or showing any kind of particular movement or any kind of feeling, really. And we're going to make an explosion kind of dispersion happening of kind of particles looking pixelated. We're using a couple different masks here and using a shape transform layer and a few different effects. So going to get started on this, let's go ahead and we'll start a new document. But first, rather, why don't we just begin by choosing an image to work with. And so what I've got here is, just used for an example's sake, would be an image of another football player from the same team, a man named Jerry Rice here. And so what I'm going to do is copy this image and go back into Photoshop, and I will start a new document. And Photoshop will recognize the dimensions of this document and automatically size it that way. So I'll go edit and paste, and voila, fits right in. Alright, so the thing we want to do first is we want to select the outline of this figure and pull it out. And so there's a few ways we can do that. We can try and use our quick selection brush and click around inside of the character here, the figure, person, whatever you may pick. And I'm just clicking and dragging this quick selection brush, and I think that it helps that the background is a little out of focus. That was one thing I was going to mention while choosing your images. Make sure that there isn't too many other people, figures, or anything in the general focus of your image. See how everything else is kind of blurry? When you're looking for your image, make sure that there's not too many other figures in here. You really want kind of one standalone figure. And so now that it looks like I have just about the entire figure selected with the quick selection brush, I will go ahead and zoom in just a tad and go around and make sure all my edges are good. So if I zoom in here on the foot, I can see that I can go a little bit further. Make sure your add to selection is chosen so that you can keep adding to your selection. I'm going to make the brush size just a little bit smaller to get some of these little finer details. Doesn't need to be spot on the dot perfect. Oops, that went a little too far. Sometimes the selection brush, it's easier to actually just click once, okay, because actually it's having a tough time with that line right there. Okay, so it looks like we go around the edge, the bottom of the foot. Maybe we'll try and get a couple of these cleats. Yeah, having a tough time getting those right now. So maybe I'll just turn this brush even smaller. And, oh, no, really not getting too far. Okay. Quick selection brush is kind of going a little bit too far for me there. Okay, but I think that most of my edges look good. If there's little spaces where you want to unselect them, just click your subtract from selection tool. Looks like I have most of the edges here. Maybe I'll make this indentation here by the hand go a little bit deeper, and maybe bring these parts a little bit closer around the edge. Alright, and then I can see there's a couple places in the helmet where I want to select a little bit more. There we go. Cool. Alright, looks like I'm good going all the way around my figure. Oh, it looks like I missed an area in the middle there. It separated that middle section of the 8. Oh, and this one in the glove. Okay, so now I believe that my dotted line goes all the way around. Awesome. So now what we're going to do is go ahead and copy and then paste a new layer. So we have a duplicate right here, and what we'll do is actually go ahead and duplicate that one more time. So we'll right click and duplicate this layer and say A-OK. Now what we're going to do with this first layer is something a little interesting. What we can do is actually take our lasso tool, and we want to just kind of go as close around the edge of your figure as you can. Doesn't have to be perfect here for this instance. I can even just go right below that same spot there And what we're going to do is actually use an interesting Photoshop feature that I just learned, which is cool, is that we're going to make this background fill and fill this entire area as if it's just like part of the background. And so what we want to do is with my selection, sorry, I don't see it popping up. I believe that we are on the right layer. We want to fill this, and maybe it's, aha, there we go, right. So, sorry, I had the wrong tool selected. Not your move tool, but your marquee tool, this dotted line tool here, and we're going to right click right inside of our selection. We're going to go down to fill, and what we want to change our contents to is content aware. And we can do a couple things, other things, foreground colors, background colors, patterns, but content aware will take this whole blurry kind of area and fill that in. So let's press OK, opacity 100, and watch what this will do. Okay, so now if I deselect this selection, if I turn off visibility on both these layers, look at what's left on this layer. It just kind of fills in with kind of what it would think would fill in that area if Jerry Rice wasn't there. And it looks believable. It's a little off, but that's okay. It still kind of fills in and does the purpose that we need it to do. All right, so what we want to do now is take this layer, the underneath copy of your figure, and we're going to transform its size just a tiny bit. And so what we're going to do is take this underneath layer, I want to stretch it out a bit. Yeah, I feel like that's pretty good right there. Alright, so that it's a little stretched out from the other one. Okay, we'll apply that transformation, and then what we're going to do is create a layer mask on this layer, and we want to fill it black. Okay, so your foreground color wants to be black. We want to take our fill bucket, and with your layer mask selected, we're just going to fill that layer with black. Okay, and so what we're going to do is eventually reveal some of that layer. Okay, but for right now, what we're going to do is also add a mask to this top layer here, and what we can start with is actually making some bits kind of break away from him on this top layer. Okay, so what we're going to do is paint with our brush. So we're going to take the brush tool. We're going to want a square brush for this. So if you don't already see square brushes in your menu here, if we click on the gearbox here and go down to square brushes and then click on append, it will add those to your brush list. And so the one we want to take is about the 18 size one, and we want to mess with some of the brush settings. Okay, so if you click on this little folder with the brushes on it, it'll open your brush menu on the side here. And so we've got a few things we want to turn on: scattering, keeping it as, oh, doesn't look like, oh, there we go. So there's the scatter. So we turn up the scatter, turn it up a pretty good amount. I'd say you could turn it up to 900 to 1000%, keeping the count down at 1 and the count jitter at 0%. So the count means it packs in more, so we want less there. The other thing we want is shape dynamics turned on, and the size jitter. Okay, so this is going to make the size of these squares more in variety. See how I would turn this up and it's adding more variety in the size of the squares? We want that to be up high. 95% should probably work for that. Okay, so let's close that menu, and what we're going to do now is brush on this mask layer. Okay, we're going to brush on this with our brush that we just selected, black brush, and just kind of click around the edge of this image that you're going to make kind of breaking away. And I'm just clicking once at a time, and as you can see, it's kind of erasing little squares at all different variety of sizes. Now you can click and drag to kind of get a bit of a scattered brush effect, but be careful about that. it's very sensitive, okay, and so you might not want to do that too much. So you might want to undo or go back in your history if that erases, a little bit too much for you. Okay, so you can click once at a time though as well, and I find that that works well for most of your spots, and maybe in some larger spots you click and drag it. Okay, cool. So that's pretty good. Got that broken up there. And then next what we're going to do is actually go to this black mask layer, and we're going to use our eraser, or, right, actually we're not going to use our eraser. I mean, we're going to paint in white here. So we're going to paint in white all outside the area here where we're revealing some of that stretched out figure that we had before. So I'm just clicking and dragging and kind of flicking my mouse a little bit to get some of these bits. Okay, now again you can click once, twice, see what you get. And that's looking pretty cool so far. Alright, so we're pretty close here. Now what we're going to do is add one more little effect to this layer. And we're going to use our effects panel down here, and we're going to add a drop shadow to these. Okay, and that's going to really help those stand out. So our drop shadow menu opens here, and you can see that you can see the shadow and how it plays off of these pieces and really kind of helps them stand out. So you can play with options like the distance here. I'll keep the distance kind of low. That's the distance of the shadow. The spread, so how far you want it spread out. 20 or so works there. Size, you can turn the size up. You don't want it too big because then you can't really see those little shadows. And the opacity is the other thing, so you can make those really kind of dark. Or we can keep them kind of in the middle here, which I think is where we want them to be. Alright, we say OK, and there we have it. Kind of this pixelated, broken up looking image of someone running. So we got Jerry Rice here, all broken up, running through bits. And that is it for this Photoshop tutorial.